Now, when we talk about types of LGBT adoption, there are many different types, and they are really based on the jurisdiction of the various states involved. So, what I'd like to look at is some of the types of LGBT adoption. The first type is single or individual parent adoption. Um, this involves individual adoption. It's a traditional type of adoption where one unmarried person seeks to adopt a child that has been put up for adoption by the birth parents of by the birth parents or by the state. This is important simply because in a gay couple, a gay or lesbian couple, one of the individuals adopt a child. Obviously, the nuance is that the child is only the child of one of the partners. But it is a possible type of adoption out there, the single or individual parent adoption. We also have joint adoption. And joint adoption is when the unmarried couple petitions the court to adopt a child that has been placed for adoption by the birth parents or by the state. Now, this is the evolving form of adoption. There's states, and it's an expanding number given the decisions in Oberfeld and obviously in more so in Lawrence versus Texas. There are many, many states that where same-sex adoption, where the partners to a gay relationship or marriage can jointly participate to adopt statewide. There's 14 states and the District of Columbia. The states that are involved are California, Colorado, Connecticut, obviously the District of Columbia, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. Again, we see the pattern we've seen before of the Northeast and the Western states, with a couple of the Midwest states, Iowa and Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin thrown in. Now, besides this form, we also have where it's permitted in some other jurisdictions. This is where same-sex couples have successfully petitioned to adopt in additional jurisdictions, two states in particular, Nevada and New Hampshire. But we still have states where it's utterly rejected. And this is being challenged as we speak in such states as Florida, Mississippi, and Utah, Michigan, and Arkansas. Um, in fact, they put it up to a vote where there was a statutory ban in Arkansas where the voters themselves agreed to strike down the possibility of either adoption or foster parenting by cohabitating unmarried individuals. Now, with the permission of same-sex marriage, places like Michigan or Arkansas, this would probably no longer be the case. Well, you also have second parent adoption. This type of adoption involves one parent who already has the legal rights to the child and a second parent that is petitioning for joint rights with that parent. The initial parent does not give up any parental rights. It's the second parent option that's viable among gay and lesbian couples that reside in the state that do not allow joint same-sex adoption. So, in other words, the child is the natural child of one of the parents and gets adopted by the partner parent. And again, we have many different states where this form of adoption is permitted. 10 states and the District of Columbia. It's almost like I'm naming off the same states, because I am. California, Colorado, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Wisconsin. but it's also permitted in other jurisdictions. In other words, legal actions were taken to make sure that it's permitted in these other jurisdictions. They petitioned or through lawsuits got permission in other states, including, strangely enough, Alabama, Alaska, not so surprising, Delaware, Hawaii, Iowa, but interestingly, Louisiana, not interesting, Maryland, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, interestingly, New Mexico, North Carolina, and not as interestingly, Oregon, Rhode Island, Texas, and Washington. So we have a tremendous spread of states that allow. But again, we have the clunkers, the states that do not or utterly reject second parent adoption. And of course, this is currently being challenged. And by the time we have this audio PowerPoint, it might also be struck down in these states: Florida, Mississippi, Utah, Michigan, and Arkansas. Um, Again, many of the states it was put up to petition by referendum to the voters, or that the challenge has failed in these states, and the like. Now, in continuing with these myths and rhetoric concerning LGBT adoption, let's look at another incredibly offensive issue. The argument that children raised in homosexual households will become gay. Incredibly offensive concept. Obviously, children that are raised in heterosexual households, some of them become gay. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gays. Remember, we always rely on our breeders, our heterosexual, to generate the next generation of homosexuals. But it's incredibly offensive. And the reason being is the bulk of the evidence to date indicates that children raised by gay and lesbian parents are no more likely to become homosexual than children raised by heterosexuals. As one researcher has put it, if heterosexual parenting is insufficient to ensure that children will also be heterosexual, there is no reason to conclude that children of homosexuals also will be gay. And there's been a plethora of different studies. Studies reflect that that asking the children of gay fathers to express their sexual orientation showed the majority of children to be heterosexual, with the proportion of gay offspring similar to that of a random sample of the total population. If the amount of gay children to gay parents is similar to the random sample of gay children to heterosexual parents, then there's no causation. There's no proven causation. In fact, in an assessment of more than 300 children born to gay and lesbian parents in 12 different samples, it shows no evidence of significant disturbances of any kind in the development of the sexual identity among these individuals. So study after study has grown to or shown that there is no relationship between your sexual orientation being at all dependent on your parents' sexual orientation. Another incredibly offensive um, myth is that it's an unnatural environment. The children will develop problems growing up due to this unnatural lifestyle. Again, it's used to challenge LGBT custody and or adoption. Courts have expressed concern that children raised by gay and lesbian parents may have difficulties with their personal and psychological development, including self-esteem and in social and peer relationships. Because of this concern, researchers have focused on children's development in gay and lesbian families. The fascinating studies in this area conclude that children of gay or lesbian parents are no different than their counterparts raised by heterosexual parents. In a famous article, 1992, called Children of Lesbian and Gay Parents, by Charlotte Patterson, Charlotte states that despite dire predictions about children based on well-known theories of psychosocial development, and despite the accumulation of a substantial body of research investigating these issues, not a single study has found children of gay or lesbian parents to be disadvantaged in any significant respect relevant to children of heterosexual parents. In fact, in psychiatry alone, there was a study by Laurentine from the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital, and she agrees with this finding. She says, in part, the literature does not indicate that these children fare any worse than those of heterosexual parents in any area of psychological development or sexual identity formation. A parent's capacity to be respectful and supportive of the children's autonomy to maintain her own intimate attachments far outweighs the influence of the parent's sexual orientation alone. A fancy way that Miss Fromm says that as long as they're supportive of whatever choices that the child may wish to voice or wish to pursue, as long as you're supportive, A child of gay parents are just as likely to become heterosexual than homosexual. And the interesting thing is, in the same percentages as the overall population, 95% roughly, 95 to 90% heterosexual, 5 to 10% homosexual. Now, to bring it home, what I want to do is return us to the law, and specifically to the most famous case in the area of homosexual adoption, the adoption of Tammy. Okay? The case came from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in um, Massachusetts. And basically, it follows from this the facts of the case. You have a lesbian couple that were cohabitating. This is prior to marriage being allowed in this in Massachusetts. But the partners were Susan and Helen. They petitioned the family court judge to jointly adopt Susan's biological daughter, Tammy. So it would have been similar to a second parent adoption. The trial judge granted the petition after a hearing and sought the confirmation from the appellate level of courts for this decision. It goes up to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, the highest state court, as I said before, and they affirmed the lower court's decision, concluding that there was no statutory basis for presenting this joint adoption, which was shown to be in the best interest of the child. And that is the key phrase, best interest of the child. In the olden days, basically prior to the 1970s, the standard in adoption or child rearing or anything related to a parent and a child was best interest of the mother. Now this has changed. It's now best interest of the child. Now you could see why the court would believe this, because the women were both surgeons and faculty members of a little place called Harvard Medical School. They had been partners in a long-term relationship for over 10 years, and they had jointly and separately cared for the child. So the child grew up wanting for nothing. Now, the reasoning of the court is as important as the facts of the court. The first part of the reasoning is that the child would benefit from a second loving parent. Tammy, in particular, the subject of the case, would benefit from the guidance and support of a second parent who is legally obligated to her. The adoption would also allow Tammy to inherit from Helen's family trust. See, Susan was a natural parent. Helen was in the relationship with Susan. So Tammy would want for nothing in the various trusts and monies coming from Helen's estate. And it would also help provide even more health insurance benefits and the possibility one day of Social Security benefits from Helen's estate. The second point was the fact that the adopted parents were of the same sex and unmarried cohabitants was considered in terms of the relevancy to Tammy's, the child's, best interest. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court did not take on the issue of gay marriage, but they did conclude that evidence was extensive and favored the adoption because it was in the best interest of the child, Tammy. The court also considered whether the law prohibiting same-sex adoptions under these circumstances should stand. And on point, the court concluded that there was nothing in the statute that would warrant prohibiting this type of adoption. So while they didn't take on the issue of same-sex marriage, they did take on point in Massachusetts, the issue of same-sex adoption. The final, and I'm sorry, before we go on, you see the focus on the best interest of the child and how being raised by two loving parents, whether they be a pair of heterosexual, a couple, or a lesbian couple, the best interest of the child standard would be satisfied. The final issue, and opponents are still adamant, is all the myths that we talked about before, especially those argued on moral grounds. They say, they come out and say that they're against the lifestyle and the values of gay and lesbian couples. And they're very adamant that it's contrary to the best interest of the child to be raised and educated in such an environment. Well, the fascinating thing is the child is surrounded by love in a gay couple or a lesbian couple. The hate comes in when these opponents breed in their children or in themselves hatred of gays and lesbians and the lifestyle. So it is true that children of gay couples would face discrimination and the like, but from the same individuals that are supposedly upholding some kind of morality. So it's fascinating. It's hypocrisy of the first order.